Good morning and welcome back, my dear students. Today we are going to deliver our second lecture on basic terms and body orientation in anatomy and physiology. So, as we discussed earlier, that uh, terms are very important to study proper anatomy and physiology, but you can see that all over the world medical study is going on, and anatomy and physiology is being studied. So every person might have their own views, their own reviews. So clashes might be there, like we in India we will say that we will follow our standards, and we are right. People from America, they will say that we are right, we are much more educated than the people in India, and we are much more advanced in science. And people from some other country also might say that but they are advanced in the medical science. So to avoid these clashes between various countries, various people of various thoughts and various scientists, there must be a standard form which will be applicable to the whole world. So certain standards are being formed, as your ma'am taught you in your previous lecture about that terminology, Greek terminology. She was talking about that Greeks were the first, so they decided the terms. But when we are talking about the medical field, the Greeks were not. Most of the contribution was not from the Greek. It was from the Latin. Our anatomical terms, mostly they were from the Latin. Uh, they were the first in advancement for the medical sciences. Actual facts may be varied, but maximum contribution towards the anatomical science is from the Latin terminologies. So most of the old books which were there for studying the anatomy and physiology, they are in Latin, and further they are translated to the another versions of international English and particular country-wise languages. So, as you studied in your lower classes, that certain principles were followed. Like for time, we say that equator is set to 0, and according to the position of the longitudes and latitudes, the time is being adjusted accordingly, and a particular standard is formed, and equator is considered as 0 in the time. And same way for the weights, certain criteria was formed. You must have studied in your physics also that certain criteria was formed, and a standard was to be followed internationally, that this particular thing is equal to this much of the weight, and whole world is following that standards. Same way during the studying of the anatomy and physiology, likewise, if we want to tell the directional terms of the anatomy, different people might have different views if we are not following the particular standards. Say if a person is standing straight, and one person is standing in front of that person, and one person is standing in back of the person, then person standing in the front, he will say that person is standing facing towards him, and I am anterior to that person. But for the person standing behind that person, the perspective or the view may be very different. He will say that the person is standing facing his back towards him, and will follow my standard, and I am inferior or anterior, but that particular person is anterior to him. So both persons will have clashes. As earlier, when I got some time to visit your previous classes, your seniors, and I noticed that thing. They were studying the bones, and I accidentally got a chance to visit the class, and I asked them whether how they will describe this bone anatomically, and how will they prove that they are right and nobody was able to answer that thing because they were not studying the anatomy of the bone as per the anatomical terms and anatomical positions. I asked the staff also at that time, and that how will they distinguish this bone is of the right part or the left part. They said that they have also not being taught in their colleges that how to identify or distinguish the bones or other parts, other anatomy, how to study on the basis of the anatomical terms and directional terms or positions. So I felt that there is a very much need of this basic anatomy to be studied, because without, if you are not having the basic knowledge of this anatomical positions or the directional terms, and you are talking about the anatomy without knowledge of these things, then it is the totally waste, because you are just yes, making it as a parrot form. Not you are studying from your mind, not you are having the sound knowledge of that particular thing. We'll discuss, basically we will start anatomy from these basics of the anatomical position. Whatever you have to study in your anatomy and whatever you are explaining on the basis of the anatomy, or in you are considering your physiology, you always have to follow the anatomical position. Anatomical position is the standard position which the whole world has to follow whenever they are talking about anything in any part of the body, and whenever they are studying the anatomy, or a physician is writing his notes about a particular disease or any condition of the person or any trauma or anything, then also he or she has to mention accordingly or as per the anatomical position, and some various directional terms are also being followed. Come on, let's move forward and study all these things, what all these things, anatomical position and directional terms seems to like, and how they are being studied. We will be discussing all these in this orientation of the body terms. So let's move forward. So basically, when we are talking about the anatomical position, it is a standard anatomical position, and the position, as you can see in the diagram, it is a person, when a person is standing with its body erect and feet slightly being apart and the palms facing forward with the thumbs pointing away from the body. uh, Clearly note this thing, the body must be erect, feet slightly apart, palms facing forward, with the thumbs pointing away from the body. The thumbs should be away from the body. This particular position you have to keep in mind while describing anything in the anatomy. If you have this position in mind, you can easily use the further directional terms or the denotation terms, which we will be discussing further in our terminology. So all these things are basically explained on behalf of this anatomical position, and if you are not having this anatomical position in your mind, then whatever you are saying, you are not saying it authentic, and you will not be able to explain it. Any person having somewhat knowledge of anatomy can prove you wrong if he or she is knowing that you are not talking on behalf of the anatomical position. So always when you are explaining anything, you should explain on the basis of the anatomical position. Keep this in mind. So next we talk about the directional terms. These directional terms are the terms which describes one's body structure in relation to another body structure. Say, always you must have been learned in your previous lectures also, that heart is superior to this, heart is inferior to this, heart is anterior to this, heart is posterior to this, regarding the rib cage, regarding sternum, regarding lungs, regarding your abdomen, regarding your chest. All these terms must have been used, that heart lies on anterior to this, heart lies to posterior to this. So all these terms, these directional terms, describe one's body structure in relation to another body structure. Likewise, we are describing the heart in relation to the thoracic cavity, like we are describing the heart in relation to the sternum. These are the directional terms. The direction is always based on standard anatomical position. As I already said, that whatever in anatomy you are describing, it will always follow the basic anatomical position. So the direction also is always based on the standard anatomical position. Right and left refer to the body being viewed, not right and left of the observer. Whatever you are explaining, right or left, does not refer to the body being viewed by the observer from right or left. It is only based on the anatomical position. So now coming to the orientation and the directional terms, the first term we will discuss is the superior. Superior is also called as the another name of superior is the cranial, because head is related to the cranial part and head is superior part of the body. Superior is generally towards the head or the end or upper part of the structure of the body or the above. Second we will be discussing the inferior. Inferior is also called as the caudal or the tail part. So it is always away from the head or head end or towards the lower part of the structure of the body or the below. It also keep in mind that it is applicable till the tailbone, end of the tailbone. Then comes the anterior. Anterior is also termed as the ventral part. Ventral part or anterior part is towards or at the front of the body when we are standing in the anatomical position. So towards the front or at the front of the body, that part is called as the anterior or ventral. And then comes the posterior or the dorsal part. Posterior, also called as the dorsal part, it refers to when uh, toward or at the back of the body or behind of the body when we are standing in the anatomical position. So as we can see some of the examples over here. First of the example, as it is given in this diagram, it is the head is superior to the abdomen. So you can clearly see that our head, as I told you earlier, is the cranial part, and cranium is at the top of the body when we are talking about the anatomical position, and we are standing in the anatomical position. Our head basically is at the top of the body. So head is superior to the abdomen. Abdomen lies below the head, so we can say it as that head is superior to the abdomen. And second term, we discuss the inferior or the caudal part. So we can say that our navel, basically our navel or our abdomen is inferior to the chin. So we can clearly see that inferior part is below. Vice versa, we can say that our navel is inferior to the chin. Then talking about the anterior or the ventral part, which we discussed is the front part of the body. So we can see that the breastbone or the sternum is anterior to the spine. A spine lies behind, and our breastbone or the sternum lies in the front. So we can say that our sternum is anterior to the spine. Then comes the next term, the posterior or the dorsal part. The dorsal is, we discussed, and it is talking about the behind part or the towards the back or behind. So we can say that our heart is posterior. As you studied in your cardiovascular system, the heart is posterior to the rib cage or sternum. So we can see that sternum is lying in front and the rib cage is in the front, and heart is lying behind that thing. It is inside the rib cage. So as we are standing in the anatomical position, we can clearly see that our rib cage is in front and the heart is lying behind that. So we can clearly correlate these things and say that heart is the posterior to the sternum or the breast. Now we are gonna talk about next terms, that is the medial. Medial, as you might understand from the word itself, medial is the medial part. Medium, you can say it is the mid part, medial. So we can say that anatomical, as per standing in the anatomical position, the line which passes exactly middle of the body, that is called the medial line. And towards or the midline of the body, whichever part is lying and whichever part we are talking in relation to the midline of the body, it is termed as the medial part. Then second term we are discussing, it's the lateral part. Lateral is just opposite to the medial part. It is away from the midline. So it is called as the lateral part. Your outer side of the body, it's called as the lateral part. Then it is the intermediate part. We are discussing the intermediate. Intermediate means the by between. whenever we are talking about anything in the anatomical terms, and we are explaining in correlation that something is lying in between so and so thing, then we can use the term intermediate, as you studied in your cardiovascular system, that heart is situated intermediate of the lungs. For this thing we can use the term as intermediate. So examples of these, we can see that medial, for medial we can say that heart is medial to the arms are facing outwards and heart is inside. So we can see that heart is clearly or very near to the midline, so heart is medial to the arm. Second, as per we are talking to the lateral part, then we can say that our arms are lateral to the chest, or our limbs are lateral to the chest, because chest is lying toward at the midline and arms are outside the body. Then when we are talking about intermediate, as I already said, that heart is intermediate to the lungs. And second, we can say that the collarbone is intermediate between the breastbone and the shoulder. When you will study your skeletal system, you will be clearly saying that your collarbone is lying uh, in between the sternum and in between your shoulder bone. So we will be studying all these things when we will studying the skeletal system. Then next time we will be discussing about the proximal. When we are talking about the proximal, it is always denoting that it is lying to the closer of the origin of the body part at the attachment of the limb of the body trunk. We will be studying in our skeletal system the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. This will also be based on these things only. So proximal, when we are talking about any part of the body which lies closer to the attachment of the limbs or the body trunk of the body. Then opposite to that, we will be studying the next term, we will be studying the distal part. Distal is farthest part from the origin of the body part or the attachment of a limb to the body trunk. In relation, we will be giving some examples. Then comes next term we can discuss as the superficial. Is also secondly called as the external. External term also is used for the superficial, and it is towards or at the body surface. Whatever things in the anatomical position, whatever things are lying on the body surface or are at the body surface, so they are called as a superficial. And opposite to that, we are studying the term as deep, also called as the internal. It is term just opposite to the superficial, we can say away from the body surface or more internally. So when we see about the examples of proximal, we can say that elbow is proximal to the wrist, because your elbow is much nearer to your shoulder joint. So we can say that elbow is proximal to the wrist. And when we talk about the distal, we can say that knee is distal to the thigh. As per your thigh bone is confirmed, as your pelvis is confirmed, we are concerned about the pelvis. Then pelvis, when we're talking about in concern to the pelvis, then you can say that your knee is distal to the thigh, because thigh, your femur bone is just lying exactly at it's starting exactly at the pelvic joint. And you can say that knee is distal to the thigh, knee joint is your distal to the pelvic joint. Then when we are talking about the superficial example, we can say that skin is superficial to the skeletal muscles. As you know that our skin is covering the whole body, so we can easily say that the skin is the topmost or the superficial or the external part of the body. So we can say skin is superficial to the skeletal muscles. Then coming to the deep or the internal parts, we can say that any organ, you can say likewise, you can see in the diagram, it's said that the lungs are deep to the skin. So anything lying beneath the skin, we can in relation to the skin, we can say that it is deep to that. So in example, you can see that the lungs are deep to the skin. Now students, all these terms which we were discussing were the generally the directional terms, which were based on the direction of the things which were located as per the anatomical position. Then after the direction, it comes for the regional part. and the terms which we use for the regional part is called as the regional terms, which are based on the particular region of the body as per the anatomical position. So we will be discussing about the regional terms. So looking forward into the regional terms, first of all, we may move, there are the two major divisions of the body. It's the axial and the appendicular, as I discussed earlier, which we will be studying in your skeletal system. So first of all, the question arises, why a skeleton is divided into two parts, the axial or the appendicular. So the answer lies here, because basically you were not studying the basic of the anatomy. So at that point, when you was studying the skeletal system, the question arises why it is called as the axial or the appendicular. So axial is basically which you studied in your earlier classes. No term is I think new to you. This axial is old term only, which you were studying in your previous classes, like earth rotates on its own axis. The thing which lies on its axis is called as the axial. So you can see clearly our body axis lies towards the medial line. So whatever lies on the medial line from the cranial part to the caudal part, that is called as the axial. So that part is called the axial, and the skeleton which is lying from the cranium to the you can say from cranial to the caudal region, all parts of the skeletal system which are lying on those are called as the axial points, and rest of the part is called as the appendicular. Appending means when you are appended from something, you are attached and lying suspended from that part, then it is called the append. To merge out from something, from a base, particular base, like here we can say the axis of the body. When you are appending through the axis of the body, it is called as the appendicular. Same way we are dividing the body regions of our anatomical position, and it is also same way divided into the axial and the appendicular. The axial covers the head, neck and the trunk, and the appendicular covers the limbs of the body. It may be the upper limbs or it may be the lower limbs, all are covered into the appendicular skeleton, or you can say the appendicular regions of the body. Then basis of these two divisions, we can further divide the body into the regional terms. You can see clearly in the diagram that many terms are there, and some of you might be familiar to these terms. For some, these terms may be the new, but after studying this lecture, most of the things which you already have been studied in anatomy will be clear to you, why at that particular point this term was used. And as I discussed earlier, most of these terms are derived from the Latin language, and Latin has been translated to the English versions. So they are basically their original names still are having the Latin accent into them. So here we can see, when we see the anterior part of the body as per the anatomical position, we can clearly see what are the terms, regional terms we can explain as per the anterior part of the anatomical position of the body. So from starting from the head to toe, we may go into the first part. You can see here is the cranial part, and cephalic, it is here it is written in the cephalic part. The cephalic part, or the cranial part, as already discussed, it is related to the head. So the top of the head, it is called as the cephalic region. After the cephalic region, it is further divided into further subdivisions, in which we can see that when we are talking about the forehead, it is called as the frontal region. You can clearly see these terms in the diagram, which is denoted clearly. When we are talking about the forehead, the parts lying on the forehead, anything when we are talking about the forehead anatomy, then it is denoted as the frontal part. Then comes the orbital part, when we are talking about the eye orbit, and things lying in the eye orbit, or things lying inside of the eye, or when we're talking about the anatomy of the eye, it may be termed as the orbital region. Then as per when we are talking about the nose, it is denoted as the nasal region. When we are talking about the mouth, it may be denoted as the oral region. Then coming to your chin part, below the mouth, the part which you are having your mandible bone, and you are talking about your chin bone, then it is termed as the mental part. Then as per these terms, cephalic region is being covered. Then after the cephalic, there comes the cervical region, which you commonly might have seen people using as a cervical region. So it may be called as cervical, or it may be called as cervical. Different pronunciations are there. So before after the cephalic region, there lies the cervical region, the whole neck part of our body. It is termed as the cervical region. Then after the cervical region, below the cervical region, it lies the thoracic cavity. The major, most of the organs or most of the system which you will be studying are lying, important all organs are lying into the thoracic cavity. And this thoracic cavity mainly comprises of the chest area of your body. You can clearly see in this orange part, the whole part is the thoracic cavity, or thoracic region. Basically, sorry, not the cavity we will be studying somewhat further. It is the thoracic region. So basically, thoracic region is further divided into subdivisions. It is the sternal part, which your sternum bone is lying, or your chest bone is lying. It is the sternal part. Then going towards the end articulations of your upper limbs, it is termed as the axillary region, or your axilla is lying. Then we talk about the breasts of your body, the area which your breast of the body is lying in the thoracic region. It is termed as the mammary. You can say the mammary glands are present in the mammary region. Breast is present in the mammary region. Then below the thoracic cavity, we can see it is termed as the abdominal region, generated in the violet color. You can see the abdominal region. Abdominal region basically is having the umbilicus of your body, so it is further only divided into the umbilical part. And various books and various authors have different opinions about that. Basically, we will talk about the basic only. So basically, it is divided only into the umbilical part. And below the abdominal cavity, it is the pelvic region. Abdominal region, below the abdominal region is the pelvic region. Pelvic region is further, you can see clearly in the diagram, it is divided into the inguinal region, or the groin area, where all your reproductive organs or excretory organs are being located. It is the inguinal region. You will be studying further in your reproductive system. It is the inguinal or the groin region. Then after the pelvic part, it also has the pubic part, where all the external reproductive organs of your genitalia and external reproductive organs, which you can call as the sex organs, also located. That part is called as the pubic region. And different authors and different books have different opinions. Some may talk independently about the abdominal or the pelvic region, and some authors and some books also refer to the abdominopelvic region. They combinedly talk about the abdominal and pelvic, and they combinedly term it as the abdominopelvic region. The combination of the abdominal and the pelvic regions, it's called as the abdominopelvic region. Then these are the basic regions which are divided as per the anterior or the ventral part of the anatomical position of the body. And secondly, into the subdivisions, this was the axial part of the body. And when we talk about the appendicular part, the limbs of the body, then we will clearly see in the diagram that it is divided into the upper and the lower limb. And upper limb, it is having the further subdivisions, like the acromial. First you will see the acromial, where shoulder joint is located, where the bone of your collarbone, called as the clavicle, also clavicle, scapula, and your humerus, it is combining that part. That region is called as the acromial regions. You might have been seen when the players or gymnasts, maybe it may be the footballers or any sort of players, or any, you might say, the old age persons also, they fall on their shoulders, and they generally dislocate the acromion part of your clavicle, is dislocated from the major joint. And that's why it is having the acromion part over there of the clavicle or the scapula. So it is termed as the acromial region. Then below the acromial region, your upper arm, it is termed as the brachial region. And then below, when we're talking about, when we're going further, distal part of the arm, then we will be discussing it as the mid part, where your elbow joint is there. It is termed as the antecubital region. Why it is called, this will be discussing further when we will be breaking down the term and discussing in detail the terminologies. It is termed as the, your elbow point is termed as the antecubital region. Then after going further distal part of the arm, after the antecubital part, it is called as the antebrachial. The upper part is called as the brachial, and the lower part, having the radius and ulna, it is termed as the antebrachial or the forearm. Then when the part where our forearm ends, it starts with the hand region, it is called as the wrist, or it may be termed as the, anatomically it may be termed as the carpal, where all your carpal bones are located. You will be studying in your skeletal system. Then it comes to the part of the hand. It is also called as the manus. Manus is a Latin word, as I already discussed. The Latin terminology is being used, and most of the words are already having their Latin origins, but they are translated into the English. So manus is a Latin word. It is used for the hand. So a manus or hand, it is having the further divisions, subdivisions. It may be called as the palmar, your palm area, whole palm area which is there, it is called as the palmar. Then after the palmar, where palm ends and your fingers are starting, it is called as the digital region, or the digits of your fingers are located over there. And for the thumb, they are terming as it as a pollax. So the three subdivisions are there for the hand. It is the palmar, the palm region, the digital for the fingers, where digits are located, and pollax for your thumb. Then coming to the lower limb, this we were talking about the appendicular region of the upper limb, or then we were talking about, then now we are talking about the lower limb of your appendicular regions. Then we can clearly see, then first coxal region is there, where hip bone is located. That part is called as the coxal or the hip region of the body. Then after the coxal region, you are having your femoral bone, and that area which lying in the femoral bone area, it is termed as the femoral area. Then comes your knee joint. The knee joint is having the patella. As per patella, it is termed as the patellar region. Then below, we are distal, going distal to the extremities. We can see that after the knee joint, we are having our lower leg part. It is called as the crural or the leg, and it is further again divided into fibular or the perineal part. Peroneal parts. Perineal is generally used for your pelvic region. So please be aware of this thing. There are two things, perineal and peroneal. Perineal is used for the pelvic region parts, and peroneal is used for the lower extremities. So it is called as femoral or the peroneal region. Then, as we earlier studied, that for hand they are using the manus. For same way for the foot, they are using as the pedal, or we in India call it as paddle, general common terms, paddle. So paddle or pedal, both are the same things, different way of the pronunciation. So it is also called as the foot, and foot same way is having the further subdivisions. It may be the tarsal, where our tarsal bones are located. Your ankle joint is there, and your tarsal bones are located. Then it distal to the tarsal, we can say it is the metatarsals, where metatarsal bones will be located. You will be studying in your further anatomy sections. Then same way, as per your fingers of your foot are there, they are same way called as the digital, as they were called in the hand. But for the thumb, or we were calling as pollax in the hand, and same way in the foot, for the big toe we will be calling as the hallux. So these all are the common terms which we are which we will be studying these regions as per as they are concerned for the anterior or the ventral part of the anatomical position. Now, coming to the posterior or the dorsal part of human body, what our regions are being lying, we will discussing these all these regions. But for discussing these all these regions, you might have seen there is slight variation in our anatomical position. Instead of facing the placing our feet on the ground, you can see in the clearly in the diagram, our feet are slightly raised above. This is because of two regions which if your feet are placed on the floor, you can't see these the two regions. For clearly visibility of that two regions, we have slightly lifted our feet up so that student might easily understand those terms or the regions which are located below our feet. We will discussing these. So let's see what all things are the new which lies at the posterior or the dorsal part of our human body. So talking about the upper regions of the body, cephalic, it is the same, but two new regions you can see. It is the aortic part, which is located at the back of ear, your ear pinna and all that part. It is called as aortic part. Then you can see the occipital or the back of the head. Frontal we were calling as the front part of the head. When we were talking, it is the frontal part, and the occipital part, it is the back of the head. These two terms are the new terms which we can see in the dorsal or the posterior part of a human body when we're talking about the cephalic region. The cervical region, it remains the same. The acromial part, it is the same part. There's no change. The brachial part also is the same. Then comes a new term, you can see the new region, you can see it is the olecranal region. The olecranal region is generally when you might have seen your funny bone. When you're talking about your funny bone, some might have been experienced also when you suddenly hit your elbow at some furniture or something, you certainly get an electric short sort of thing, and that thing is due to your funny bone. When your funny bone gets hit, that electrical impulse type thing is generated at that point. So basically, when you are called as the olecranal region, it is generally due to the olecranal process which is located in your skeletal system. So on behalf of that, it is denoted as the olecranal region. Then antebrachial, it is same. The manus, the hand, for the hand, they are having the same things, the metacarpus and the digitals, etc. And for lower limb, the femoral part is the same. But when we were talking about the knee, it was denoted as the front anterior part of the knee. It was denoted as the patellar region. The same way, when we are talking about back of the knee, it is called as the popliteal region. And as for the anterior part of the lower limb, we were saying it is the fibular or the peroneal region. For the back of or the posterior or the dorsal region of the lower limb, it is called as the sural or the calf region, where calf muscle is being located. You will be studying in your muscular system. So it is as per Latin, it is called as the sural, or as per English, it is called as the calf region. Then for the pedal or foot, all the things the same. But in this, you are seeing the feet are slightly raised to clearly visualize the two regions which we are facing as new regions under our foot. It is the calcaneal part, where our calcaneal bone is lying, and your main joint fused bone calcaneum is complete. Body weight is on that bone. And then it comes the plantar region of the foot, where you might have seen the persons who are standing for the long times, they may be seeing the problem of the plantar fasciitis. Physiotherapy students might know very well all these things. The physiotherapy is studying the plantar fasciitis, and increase in the calcaneal bone also, that causes the pain. So these two regions are and in the pedal or the foot region are the new regions which we can see that lies below our foot. That is the calcaneal region, where your calcaneal bone is there, and whole body weight is on the calcaneal bone. These two bones are fused. You will be studying the anatomy of the skeletal system. Then comes the foot's underneath part. It is called as the plantar, where plantar fasciitis problem is most commonly seen, and the plantar muscles are there. Then coming to the back, as we discussed earlier, it is the thoracic region. it is the abdominal region, and it is the pelvic region when we're discussing about the anterior part. Same way in the posterior part we will be discussing only the back part. And back, it is further divided into the scapular, where scapula bone is located, the region completely, you can see in the blue region, the completely a shoulder bone or the scapula, which it is called, the region where scapula is located, it is called as the scapular region. Then your backbone completely, your spinal region, it is called as the vertebral region. Then comes your lower part of your spine, it is called as the lumbar region. And then comes the distal part of your spine, it is called as the sacral region, where your sacral bone will be located as per your skeletal system, it is called as the sacral region. Then coming towards the hip or the pelvic region of our posterior part, your buttocks or the back part of your body, it is termed as the gluteal region, which you must have been studied in your injection sites also, in the fundamentals of nursing. You might have studied that gluteal muscle. You are clearly being known of that injections are being injected into the IM injections are given to the gluteal muscles. Then as I clearly stated in the anterior part, the two terms are there. One is the peroneal region, and second is the perineal region. So you can see the peroneal region was for the lower limb, and perineal you can clearly see in this diagram. The perineal region is the between the anus and the external genitalia of our human body. When it is visible when you are talking about the posterior or the dorsal part of our human body. Now, as we have discussed the directional terms, the regional terms, then comes the discuss about the body planes and sections, which are also very important. It might not sound very important for studying the anatomy, but when you have to see about the radiological findings like the MRI, CT scans, or some sort of the X-rays also, you have to go through the dissection process, like for the anatomical practicals or for postmortem things they are going on. Then the body planes plays an important role in that, because according to the body planes you can describe all those things. You can clearly understand what that particular radiological image is talking about and what that radiological image finding is concerned with. So let's talk about the body planes. These are the just imaginary lines. This is not particular region. These are the imaginary lines. So these are the surfaces along which body or the structures may be cut for the anatomical study, as I discussed earlier, like for the anatomical practicals or for the postmortem sort of things. So these are the surfaces along which body or structures may be cut for the anatomical study, and there are three most common planes in our human body which human body can cut through for the study purpose or for the radiological findings. So these three planes are named as the sagittal plane, frontal or the coronal plane, transverse or also called as the horizontal planes. And sections, when we are talking about sections, are further cuts which are made, or further selections or sections made along the body plane. So all the sections, it is clearly understandable that they will be named after the plane into which they are further cut into. So as we can see that sagittal cut results in a sagittal section. So first, when we are talking about the sagittal plane, it is the plane which divides the body vertically into the right and left parts. You will be clearly seeing in the diagram also. The sagittal plane, exactly the body is vertically cut into right and left parts, and it produces a sagittal section if cut along this plane, because when further more cuts are made along this plane, they may produce a sagittal sections, as we already discussed. And they are further having the subdivisions. You can say the mid sagittal plane, that cut was made perfectly on the midline. When it is clearly the cut is made just exact halves of the body is cut, then it is called the mid sagittal. And parasagittal plane, it is termed as when your cut was off centered and not on the midline, and it may be the intermediate number of parasagittal planes. Imaginary planes are there, the parasagittal planes. It may be called as parasagittal planes. So it may not be lying exact to the middle part, and body may be cut vertically into right and left parts and from away from the midline. Now then comes the frontal or the coronal plane. When we are discussing as per the anatomical position, now you might have clear figure out that what this plane will be talking about and what this plane is seemed to be, and is cutting the body into which part. So we can clearly see the frontal or the coronal plane. This divides body vertically into the anterior and posterior parts. Two parts are made, and exactly it is cutting into the posterior and the anterior parts, the front and the back part. And further, if we can see the sections, same way as per the discussed earlier also, that it produces the frontal or the coronal sections. Then we talk about the next plane. It is the transverse or the horizontal plane. So it is clear that it divides the body horizontally 90 degree to the vertical plane and into the superior and inferior parts. Frontal was dividing into the posterior and anterior parts, and transverse is dividing into the superior and inferior parts. And it generally produces a cross section. Generally it produces a cross section for the observation purposes also. When slides are made, this transverse plane is mostly used. Then comes the oblique section. It is the result of cut of an angle other than the 90 degree to the vertical plane. Whenever there is a deviation other than the 90 degree, and at particular angle the body is cut into pieces, then it is called as the oblique. Now students, you can see in these diagrams, when we're talking about the radiological findings, you can see clearly over here the first part. It is denoting the sagittal planes, sagittal plane also, that the mid sagittal planes, as it is dividing the body from the midline. Exactly, it is dividing the body into half from the midline towards the median. So it is called the median or the mid sagittal plane, and part of the sagittal plane only. And below you can see when its body is cut, it is clearly visualizing the radiological finding or the MRI scans of the body, which is clearly showing the rectum and the intestines, and you can see the vertebral column also. So it is exactly dividing the body into half. So that's why it is called as the medial plane. Second, you can see the frontal or the coronal plane. This way, as we discussed, was the plane which is dividing our body into the anterior and the posterior parts. So you can clearly see when a body is cut into frontal or the coronal plane, clearly the lungs, heart, liver, stomach and spleen are clearly visible into the sections when MRI is being conducted. And then third, you can see the transverse plane, which we discussed, is mostly for the sectional studies only. So when abdomen is cut into the transverse plane at the 90 degree, you can clearly see the subcutaneous fat layer, the spinal cord, liver, aorta, pancreas and spleen are clearly visible into the transverse plane section. Clearly by the single diagram now you can see this is the medial or sagittal plane, or mid sagittal plane, which is cutting the body into the exact half. You can clearly see into the diagram that the body is divided into the perfect left and right part, and she is almost in the anatomical position, and body will be divided into exact half, and all the things, all the both the right and left part will be having the equal cross sections, and equal parts will be available to both the parts. So it is dividing from the median or the mid sagittal plane. This is why it is called. And second, when we see the next plane of our frontal plane, frontal way, as we discussed, it is dividing into the front and the back part. Same way, it is dividing the body into half, but it is dividing as such that the body is split into the front and the back part. And same way, when we are talking about the transverse, you can clearly see that in transverse part, at the 90 degree angle cut is made, and the body is divided from the abdomen, as you can see in this diagram. So basically these are the main planes of the body, and further when more cuttings are made in these plane, they are termed as the sections. Now as students, we have completed all these things, the basic terminology, the directional, the region, the planes of the body. Then you might have heard that I was discussing somewhat about the body cavities and the membranes. Next comes our body cavities and membranes. What are these cavities or the membranes exactly when we are talking about? So you can see that our whole human body, when you're studying, you have studied in your cardiac system, your heart, it is compressed between the lungs, and in front of that is the thoracic cavity. You might have studied in that thoracic, it lies in the thoracic cavity and pleural cavity and so on. So cavities would have been discussed. So what exactly these cavities are? These cavities are the safe house of our human body, as you might say. You are having the safe in your house, but what you are using that safe for? You are using the safe for keeping your valuable things, your gold, your money, any sort of valuable things you are keeping in your safe, your almiras. And that these body cavities are exactly the safe house of our human body, in which all the precious organs of our human body are being kept, and they are protected. You can see that our lungs are also continuously expanding, our heart is also continuously beating, and various we are having the digestive movement, also the peristaltic movement or other some movements are also going on simultaneously, as we discussed earlier. Also, all things are going simultaneously. Despite of that, you can see when you rub any part of your body continuously to something, you might get a rash due to friction. You might also get some cut sort of thing if you are going into the pointed things. You might also get the cut or a rash is confirmed, that after rubbing for some time you might get a rash on your skin. So internally these organs are very delicate, and they are continuously working throughout the life. So if they are working throughout the life and they are compactly packed, as they are not having any much space between them, and they are working continuously, and they are rubbing against each other, you can imagine the lungs are expanding or relaxing, the heart is beating, both are having the frictions with each other. And if at this level the friction is going on, the organs might get rashes, infections, and due to friction they might also be exposed to wear and tear. So to protect all these valuable things, our body has been designed in such a way that it is lying between the internal cavities, and these cavities provide different degrees of protection to the organs within them. And basically there are two sets of the cavities: the dorsal body cavity and the ventral body cavity. When we talk about the cavities, it is basically divided into two regions or two cavities. It is the dorsal body cavity and the ventral body cavity. Now, coming to the point when we are talking about the dorsal body cavity, it is further divided into two subdivisions. It is the cranial cavity, it is the vertebral cavity, and the dorsal body cavity. It protects the fragile nervous system. Our whole nervous system is, as you can see, it is the control center of the human body, and all things are controlled through the nervous system. So, at first priority, the system must be protected, and it is protected by the dorsal body cavity, which is further divided into two subdivisions. It is the cranial cavity. Now, cranial word is being used, and we have studied already what for cranial is being used, or what for the cephalic is being used. So cranial is directly concerned with the cranial part or the head part of the body. So cranial cavity, it is located in the head part of the body, and it encases our brain. Our brain is surrounded by the cranial cavity, and it is protected by the cranial cavity. Then second subdivision of our nervous system, it is the spinal cord. So it is vertebral cavity, as we already discussed the regions when we were talking about the posterior part of the human body. As per the anatomical position, we discuss the vertebral region of the body, and that vertebral region is having the vertebral cavity, which encases our spinal cord, and it protects and engulfs our spinal cord from any sort of friction, injuries, etc. So these are the two subdivisions of the body cavities, which are the dorsal body cavity. It is called as the cranial and the vertebral cavity. Now you can clearly see in this diagram that the upper part of here, it is called as the cranial cavity, and it is containing the brain. And when you are going descending below to the caudal region and our spinal cord is concerned, it is called as the vertebral cavity. And both these cavities in combination, they are called as the dorsal body cavities. So keep in mind that cranial, it is talking about the head, or it is engulfing our brain, and it is protecting our brain. And when we are going downwards towards the caudal region or the spinal cord region, it is the vertebral cavity that contains our spinal cord and is protecting our spinal cord. And in combination to these, these both are called as the dorsal bottle cavity. Second reason why this is called as a dorsal, it is because we when we studied the terminology, we were discussing that dorsal is the back part, and you can clearly see that our brain and the spinal cord, these all are located in the back part of the body. So it is commonly called as the dorsal body cavity. After talking about the dorsal, we are going to talk about the ventral body cavity. As you can see, the ventral body cavity, due to terms, as you are now clearly aware about the terms, it is the front part of the body, and it is houses the internal organs. One thing I forgot to tell you, that all these things which are lying into the body cavity, they are collectively called as the viscerae, or commonly viscera. You might have heard whenever there is a murder case or something, sort of something, and you might have heard that viscera is sent to the lab for the investigation purposes. That viscera is nothing but the collective organs which are lying into the particular body cavity. So here we are talking about the ventral body cavity. Ventral body cavity has two further subdivisions separated by the diaphragm. So it may be clearly said that above the diaphragm and below the diaphragm, two subdivisions are made. The cavity which is above the diaphragm, it is called as the thoracic cavity, and which is below the diaphragm, it is called as the abdominopelvic cavity. As we already discussed, some authors in regional parts, some authors describe two regions differently. They may call as the abdominal region and pelvic region independently also, and some authors may combine it to form the abdominopelvic region. The reason behind that is this only, that the cavity they have in common. So you might use anything, you might talk independently also, you might combine also for the abdominopelvic cavity. So next we're going to talk about these details of the thoracic and the abdominopelvic cavities. Talking about the thoracic cavity, there are the two pleural cavities for the subdivisions into the thoracic cavity. They have two pleural cavities, and each cavity surrounds one lung. You will be studying in the respiratory system when you will be studying in medical surgical, the pneumonia is basically caused in these cavities only, when pleural fluid gets accumulated and infection is there. So they are having the two pleural cavities, and pleural is generally used for the lungs. So this will be continue in the terminology section. Pleural is used for the lungs, and each cavity surrounds one lung, and so there will be the two pleural cavities. Then towards the medial line, there will be a mediastinum which contains the pericardial cavity, and from the pericardial cavity you might clearly understand, you have studied your heart chapter, what pericardia may be related to, and it generally surrounds the other thoracic organs such as the esophagus, trachea, etc. The mediastinum contains the pericardial cavity, and mediastinum combinedly it surrounds the other thoracic organs also. And now when we talk about the pericardial cavity, it is clearly understood to you that pericardial cavity, it is enclosing our heart. So now coming to the diagram, you can clearly see over here, it is the thoracic cavities are basically divided into two further categories based on the diaphragm. You can see in the middle, the diaphragm is there, and it is divided into abdominopelvic cavity in combination, and independently you can call it as abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity also. And the upper part, it is divided into the superior mediastinum and pelvic, and it is having the pleural cavities, which you can see the lungs are there, both lungs are lying in that, and the pericardial cavity within the mediastinum, which engulfs or encloses our heart. Then comes the diaphragm, and after diaphragm, abdominal cavity is there, which all contains the digestive viscera, the digestive organs of the human body, like the stomach, your intestine, your liver, all things, these are enclosed into the abdominal cavity. And then comes to the pelvic cavity. When we're talking about the pelvic cavity, it generally contains all the reproductive organs and some of the excretory organs of the human body. Likewise, you can see that the urinary bladder, reproductive organs, and the rectum. Now, talking about the membranes in the particular cavities, so membranes in the ventral body cavity, you can see the serosa, which is also called as the serous membrane. You will be studying into the anatomical terms. The serous membrane is based on the serous fluid. It is a thin double-layered membrane that covers surfaces in the ventral body cavity. Because you can see that cavity is a hollow structure in which organs are enclosed, but to protect them, as you can see, for the various protection you are using the mattress to protect your back, and for sleeping we are using the mattress, and for impact resistance the cars are having the airbags, etc. And to reduce the friction, you may see that various vehicles or the mechanical instruments, they are having certain sort of oils, and oiling is done to reduce the friction. So in our body also, to reduce the friction and to eliminate the heat produced through the friction, there may be some protective lubricating thing, sort of thing, into the body, and between the cavity and the organs, something might be there which may reduce the friction. So best sort of thing is like fluid like structure, fluid, because it easily transfers the heat from one part to the another, and it is also a anti-friction product, very good anti-friction product. So that particular fluid which is present, it is called as a serous fluid, and in between the organs and in between the body cavities, there lies a thin membranes, which are these fluid filled membranes, and these double layered membranes, these are called as the serous membranes. And the serous membranes, they are further called as the parietal serosa, which lies the internal body cavity walls. It is called as the parietal serosa, and the visceral serosa, which covers the internal organs. So you can see that our body is divided further into the parietal and visceral serosa. Parietal serosa is when we talk about the whole body, which is being protected from the external environment, that is called as the parietal serosa, which is separating the whole body from the internal organs. And then parietal serosa, as per as parietal serosa, visceral serosa is there, which is protecting or covering the internal organs. So in between these two serosas and two membranes, these are the fluid filled cavities, fluid filled membranes, and these double layer are separated by a slit-like cavity filled with serous fluids. So in between they are having a common cavity, and which is having the fluid which reduces the friction and acts as various helping hand to the organs and the human body, and it is filled with a serous fluid, and the fluid is secreted by both layers of the membrane. Now, when we're talking about the cavity in common, we said that it is a serosa, or the fluid-filled hollow structure, and it can also be named on behalf of the organs which it is surrounding. As we already discussed, the pericardium cavity is the cavity which is surrounding the lungs. The pleural cavity or pleurae, which is the pericardium, which is surrounding the heart, and the pleural or pleurae, which is generally surrounding the lungs. And then comes the peritoneum, which is surrounding all the organs which are there located in the abdominopelvic cavity. So on basis of their structural protection also, they can be named. Now you can clearly see in this diagram what I was talking about, the parietal, the visceral, and the pericardial space. It is shown here. So you can clearly see that the parietal pericardium is the part which is directly in touch with the pericardium cavity, and then there is space between in here which is having the pericardial space, and which is filled with a serous fluid, and then in touch with the viscera or the organ, which we already discussed here. Say for here we are talking about the heart,
and the visceral pericardium is there. So you can see the parietal pericardium is the outermost layer, which is generally in touch with the body cavity, and then there is a space in between which is filled with the fluid, which is protecting us from the various friction or other sort of impacts which are ongoing throughout the life to our body. And then comes the visceral pericardium, the layer which is surrounding the viscera or the organ, or in case of hair we can say it as heart. So this is the clear illustration, and you must have gone through, and if you are still having some doubts, you can again ask me, no problem. In this way, here with a balloon also, its example is explained. You inflate a balloon, and you are pressing a hand in between it, and balloon is then further divided into two regions. One balloon is outer side and one which is in touch of your hand, and in between the space which is filled with the air. And in same way, when we are talking about the pericardium, this outer layer may be called as the parietal pericardium, and your hands may be called as the viscera of the body. And so the inner lining of the balloon which is in touch with your hand, it is called as the visceral pericardium, and in between the space which is there, it is called as the pericardial space, or which is filled with a serous fluid. The air in this balloon may be termed as the serous fluid. So it is comparable to the parietal serosa outer layer. It is comparable to the parietal serosa, and in between the which air, it is comparable to the serous cavity, and the inner part of the balloon wall, which is compared to the visceral serosa. So this diagram clearly denotes all these things. So, as we clearly discussed, the serous membranes with their fluid filled, and if any sort of infection, when I was talking about the pneumonia, any sort of infection gets into, or the pathogen gets into these fluid filled membranes, it may cause an infection, or it cause a disease. Secondly, normally which these smooth layers can become rough, as we were talking about that due to friction or other various factors, these may become rough and even can stick together if the fluid is not present, or the equilibrium or the homeostatic imbalance is there between the fluid formation and the fluid absorption of the body. They may even stick together, resulting in excruciating pain, because the friction will be present, and the organs will be having pain. So certain sort of examples you can see over here is pleurisy and the peritonitis, which we will be discussing in medical surgical conditions. These are all the results of the these serous membranes infections, or some sort of imbalance of the homeostatic imbalance of the serous membranes. This is resulting in these sort of diseases and inflammation and infections. Coming to the last part, when we have talked about the terminology, when we are talking about directional terms, regional terms, all the body cavities, membranes, then you might have seen or heard about the certain regions, abdominal, pelvic regions of the human body, denoted in certain sort of medical surgical diseases, etc. And somebody referring to, or if you have visited to the hospital, they might also be mentioning all these things. So there are some imaginary lines which we have divided our body, our abdominal cavity into, and these are termed as the quadrants and the regions. So the quadrants, as you might have studied in the math also, the quadrants are the divisions used primarily by the medical personnel, and abdominal pelvic region of our human body is sectioned into the quarters and quadrants, because it is termed four quadrants, always having four directions and four divisions. So our human body, and the abdominal pelvic cavity of our human body is also divided into the four sections, or the quadrants, which are termed generally as the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. You will be seeing in the diagram. Yeah, you can see it is divided basically into the four quadrant, four basically divisions there are, in which first one is the right upper quadrant over here, then it is the left upper quadrant, then it is the right lower quadrant, and the left lower quadrant, and according to the locations of the organs, these quadrant may be termed as in the medical or surgical finding. Now you can see your right upper quadrant, it is having your liver, its spleen, and then some part of your stomach also, and your large intestine also is located in the right upper quadrant. Mainly which part of the intestine is located in the right upper quadrant, you can clearly see over here. It is a transverse colon, but these things we will be studying in when we particularly will be talking about the detailed anatomy of the subject, and when we are talking about the subject, then we will be discussing all these things. But this is for general reference, that how you should identify the anatomical terms, and what anatomical things are being explained in that particular chapter. So majorly we are dividing into the four quadrants. So when we talk about the further divisions of these abdominopelvic quadrants, further it is divided into the regions. So when we talk about the regions of the abdominopelvic quadrants, it is further divided into the 9 divisions, which are called as the regions, resembling the tic-tac-toe grid. All of you might have been played that cross and tick, cross and tick, cross and tick game, and it is basically resembling that tic-tac grid only. And almost all of the anatomists, for finding some interventions or studying the organs, they are using these particular regions, and these may be divided as the first right hypochondriac region, then the epigastric region, then on the left part same way they are dividing into the left hypochondriac region, then comes the right lumbar region, then they are divided into the umbilical region, left lumbar region, right iliac or the inguinal region, then hypogastric region, and then we talk about the left iliac or the inguinal region. Now you can clearly see over here mostly the terms used you have already studied: epigastric, hypochondriac, lumbar, umbilical. These all these things you already have studied when we were talking about the regional terms of the body, anterior and posterior part of the body. When we were studying, you have studied almost all of these things. So it might, you are now, when you're saying these terms, you might not feel like what we are listening about, what are these terms. Most of the terms, they are automatically understandable when you have studied those terms. So this way, this terminology and basics of the anatomy and physiology will help you throughout your nursing course, and in also in the medical, surgical and other subjects which we will be studying further in the next years. So please be aware that keep all these things in mind. So let's talk further. Now you can clearly see over here the both compared. First of all, we divided into the four regions, four quadrants, and now we are dividing it into the 9 basic regions, into the 4 planes. So here you can see the right hypochondriac region, epigastric region, left hypochondriac region, right lumbar, and umbilical region. When we were talking about the abdominal region, when we were studying, we said that the umbilical part is there. So umbilical region, it is understandable that is the middle part of our abdominal cavity. Then comes the left lumbar region, then comes the right iliac or the inguinal region, hypogastric region, left iliac region. So basically locations you can clearly see over here, which quadrant which part is located. You can see over here your liver and your gallbladder is located into the right hypochondriac region. Then talking about the right lumbar region, you can see over here ascending colon of the large intestine, and is located into the right lumbar region. Then you can see into the right iliac region or the inguinal region, that your cecum and the appendix is located into this region. Then epigastric region, you can clearly see your stomach, mostly your stomach and some part of your liver is located into the epigastric region. Then you can see the transverse colon of the large intestine and descending colon of the no sorry the transverse colon of the large intestine, it is located, and small intestine is located into the umbilical region. Then descending colon of the large intestine, it is located into the left lumbar region. And talking about the left iliac or the inguinal region, the initial part of the sigmoid colon is located into that. And last not but least, the hypogastric or the pubic region, you can see over here a urinary bladder, and your other excretory organs, which we'll be seeing in the back side, are located into the hypogastric or the pubic region. So these are some basic things which you have to keep in mind whenever somebody asks you where your ascending colon of large intestine is being located, in which part. And if you're having the knowledge of these things, you can easily say that it is located into the right lumbar region. Nothing is impossible for you then. And if somebody asks you where a small intestine and the transverse colon of the large intestine is located, then you can clearly say that it is located into the umbilical region. So it is very easy. Talking about some other cavities also, in addition to that main two body cavities, some other cavities are also present in our body, but they are exposed to the external environment. The two major cavities which we talked about were not exposed to the external environment. They were lying beneath our body structures, and they were not exposed in any way to the external factors or external environment. But our body is also having some other cavities also which are exposed to the external environment. They may be termed as the oral or the digestive cavities, the nasal cavities, the orbital cavities, middle ear cavities, and some of the cavities which we not discussed are not exposed to the environment are the synovial cavities, which we will discuss in your system, that synovial fluid is present in them and they are protecting the joints. Between the synovial joints, the synovial cavities are being present. So students, this is the end of our body orientation. Then we will be discussing our anatomical terms which we will be using in our body systems, and for studying anatomy and physiology we will be discussing those anatomical terms also. So that will be discussed in the next lecture, because I think this lecture also, despite of trying to make it very short, this also has gone a long way of about hour also. I tried my best to shorten this lecture, but this also has gone long. But anyways, if you're not having any problems in these long lectures, you can continue. Next we will be preparing our lecture for the terms. Then we will be talking about the tissue. So let's meet on our next lecture. Thank you.